Soul Reaver, the follow-on to Blood Omen and the most beloved game in the Legacy of Kain series. The wheels continue to turn in this dark fantasy universe as we look at the one whose machinations have led to this very point in time. Mobius' hatred for the vampires knows no end, and he would stop at nothing to see the ancient race utterly annihilated. Mobius would sell his soul to serve the vampire's former god, and this elder god would be more than willing to use the maniacal Mobius for his own ends. The wheel of fate needed to turn, and this could not happen with the vampires, not since the Hilden had cast the blood curse upon them. Mobius had been beheaded by Kain after inciting the eradication of the vampire race, but this, yet again, was according to his plan. His soul would rest with his master, the Elder God, awaiting his rebirth when the timing was just right. 1,000 years would pass from the events of Blood Omen, and we find Kain in power, the pillars crumbling and corrupted, with Kain refusing to become the martyr and sacrifice himself to cleanse them and restart the cycle. Nosgoth is being strangled and poisoned, with the Hilden being denied their return to Nosgoth at the hand of Kain, and Mobius being 6 feet under. There was no one to oppose Kain's debaucherous rule. In a perverse act of defilement, Kain would raid the forgotten tombs of the ancient Sarafan commanders who were responsible for the bloody crusades against the vampires of Nosgoth and the removal of Janos Audron's heart. Kain needed champions by his side, and if he was to mold Nosgoth in his image, then this tomb is where he would find them. Only the strongest and most devout individuals would do for Kain, so he resurrected the Sarafan leaders: Turel, Dumah, Rahab, Zephon, Melchiah, and Raziel. Having been dead for so long, the Sarafan leaders would have no recollection of their past lives and would be unaware that Kain was their greatest enemy in life. Kain's lieutenants would go on to create their own individual clans and bring new underling vampires into the fold to serve them. They would then claim parts of Nosgoth for themselves, subjugating the humans who once ruled the land and reduced them to cattle for the vampires to prey on. Great smokestacks were built to belch smoke into the sky to blot out the sun and allow the vampires to walk the lands freely during the day. For 1,000 years, Kain would rule and evolve, with his lieutenants following in evolution some years after Kain. Kain's power was absolute, with no vampire being as ancient or as mighty. No one would be allowed to evolve before Kain. This was seen as blasphemy until his firstborn lieutenant Raziel was given the honor of evolution before Kain. He grew wings, and even though he still swore fealty to Kain, this was unacceptable. For his transgressions, Raziel would have the bones torn from his wings, leaving useless flaps blowing in the wind. This was not his final fate, however. As Kain's ego was bruised, he needed to make an example of Raziel. The broken vampire would be dragged to the progenitor of his next form of existence, the Lake of the Dead, where Kain would order his brothers to cast him in, knowing that water was like acid to a vampire's skin, and Raziel would be ripped to shreds. For 500 years, Raziel would tumble through the relentless abyss that was meant to be his tomb, his flesh melting off to reveal bone, and the perception of time being utterly lost in the maelstrom. Raziel twisted and turned with hatred in his heart and torment surrounding his body until what was left of him came to rest on the lake bed. His body thoroughly destroyed, all that would be left was this wraith-like creature. Neither human nor vampire, he had defied death and persisted in the underworld. The Elder God would greet Raziel and tell him that he's the one who spared him from total dissolution. He would share Kain's tale and speak of the wheel of fate that has stopped working, and reveal that all who exist within Nosgoth are locked out of the cycle. With fresh hatred in Raziel's heart, he sets out to kill his brethren and eventually Kain. His body, though weak from half a millennium of torture, he discovers that the old appetite for blood has left him and has instead been replaced with a darker hunger, a hunger for souls. He would need to feed on the souls of the departed to sustain his strength and empower him on his hunt across Nosgoth. With his strength fully restored in the spectral realm, he would find planar portals that would allow him to will himself to become manifest in the physical world. With Raziel's new form being young and his physical manifestation being fragile, he would still have many of the weaknesses that plagued the old vampires, such as water and sunlight. His physical form can be easily lost if he were to be physically damaged. However, his soul would return to the Elder God and be reborn each time. Entering the world of Nosgoth 500 years after Raziel's death was a wake-up call to the deplorable rule that Kain has held for all these years. Raziel would begin his journey to the Sanctuary of the Clans, which was meant to be a safe place for all vampires and housed the pillars of Nosgoth. Along his path, however, he would chance upon two grotesque vampire spawn from his brother Dumah's clan. Time has not been kind to the existing vampires, and their evolution has started to look more like devolution. Coming upon the gates of the sanctuary, Raziel could sense that time had ravaged the land, yet it felt as if only moments had passed between its execution and resurrection. Arriving at the location of his demise, the Lake of the Dead, Raziel would be compelled to go west and visit his old clan territory to see how they had fared in his absence. What he found was utter desolation. As soon as Raziel's fate was sealed, so too was the fate of his once proud kin. His brethren descended upon his clan and decimated them, something that Raziel would feel troubled by, as he was indeed a caring leader in his unlife. Now, with his hatred seething, he had more than just himself to avenge. Happening upon two of his brother Melchiah's vampires, Raziel would be taken aback at their appearance. These were barely vampires and more closely resembled hungry beasts than the regal ancient vampires of old. Approaching the Necropolis, Raziel would notice a lone vampire hunter who doesn't seem to want to hurt him. The humans of this time were scarce and few in number. Sparing this hunter's life would earn Raziel the respect of the remaining humans, as they would see him as a savior, an avenging angel, and worship him. Continuing through this charnel house, we see imagery depicting slaughter and violence. His first encounter will be with his youngest brother, Melchiah, a shambling mess of meat and bones. I mean, he doesn't even have lips and can barely speak. Melchiah, still subservient to Kain, warns Raziel that things have changed and that he would not be welcomed by any vampire in Nosgoth. The land was totally hostile towards him. This was an era of unsettling change, and even Melchiah was fearful of what the future held. The brothers then resigned themselves to their fates and engaged in battle. Both of them weak from years of transfiguration, they partook in a strange game of cat and mouse, with Raziel baiting his brother into the adjacent rooms to drop spikes on him. Melchiah had the ability to enter the spectral realm and shift through insubstantial objects, allowing him to pass through closed gates to chase Raziel. However, the newborn soul-reaving wraith was too cunning for his brother and tricked him into the center cage of the arena. With moments left to live, Raziel demands to know where Kain is. Melchiah informs him that no one knows where the master is, and he appears as and when he sees fit. Facing the descending blades set upon him by Raziel, Melchiah would pass one final statement. Feeling the finality of his moment, he would be released. Devouring Melchiah's soul, Raziel would now be able to phase through insubstantial objects in the spectral realm, allowing him a way into the Sanctuary of Clans. Arriving at the pillars situated within the sanctuary, lo and behold, he would be greeted by Kain. After all, Melchiah had said that Kain only appears when he wants to, so clearly he has been waiting for this moment. They begin to bicker amongst themselves, Raziel rightfully condemning the genocide that Kain had committed against his clan. However, Kain cares nothing for the complainings of this undead wraith. Indeed, he is selfish and has a moral superiority complex, convicting Raziel with a question on how he would have acted if he had walked in Kain's shoes. Raziel, however, would have chosen integrity over self-preservation like Kain had done repeatedly. A fight ensued continues with Kain seemingly knowing exactly how the story ends. His overconfidence is a frustration to Raziel as he pursues Kain around the pillars. Raziel is no match for Kain in his current state, and with the Reaver in Kain's possession, Raziel is at a severe disadvantage. Raziel brought down to his knees during the fight, Kain would put his back into one final swing that would have spelled doom for the fledgling Wraith. However, something peculiar occurred. As Kain struck Raziel, the physical blade was destroyed, and Kain makes it known that this was his intent all along, spouting something about them being a step closer to their destinies. Kain departs and Raziel falls into the spectral realm. The Reaver, now released from the physical world, has manifested itself in the spectral realm too, resting itself in front of Raziel as if almost begging him to take hold of it. He reaches out to it, and in a powerful flash, the Reaver takes hold and binds itself to his very soul. The Soul Reaver and Reaver of Souls would be inextricably bound from this moment and ever after. As the dust clears, a ghost of the past would appear to Raziel. Ariel, the former guardian of balance before Kain, her death long ago at the hands of Mortanius drove her lover Nepraptor insane, which in turn leaked into the minds of all the other guardians, poisoning and corrupting them. Ariel, forced to haunt the pillars and not finding release from this afterlife because of Kain's selfish decisions. Her hatred would grow exponentially for Kain for hundreds of years. She shares some of her past with Raziel, and when Raziel tells her that he is no friend of Kain's, she offers him guidance should he have need of it. She directs him to the east, where she says a stifled titan stands in mute surrender, unwilling host to a parasitic swarm. To the east lay the silenced Cathedral, once a stronghold of humans equipped with great sounding pipes that may have been able to blast out a powerful melody that would have destroyed the entire vampire race. Now occupied by Zephon and his arachnoid clan of Zephonim, they had eradicated almost all human life in this region, barring the fanatic cultists who worshipped the vampires. Raziel fights his way through a complex series of chambers, finally arriving at his brother Zephon himself. Ariel's words ringing true in his head as he beholds his massive and disgusting brother, who has grown his entire body through the cathedral. Raziel states that this is an appropriate reflection of Zephon's soul, as he is both inwardly and outwardly a monster. Unlike Melchiah, who sought release from his pitiful existence, Zephon wishes to persist and evolve and devour endlessly. Raziel is now more able than ever. With the Reaver in hand, he is able to face his brother in head-on combat. The fight is simple, as Raziel need only set his brother ablaze by picking Zephon's eggs up, catching them on fire, and throwing them back at him. No one will remember or mourn this terrible creature, yet from his death, Raziel would consume his soul and gain the ability to scale walls in the physical world. With this new ability in hand, Raziel would head back to the pillars to convene with Ariel once again and receive her guidance. Her message to him foreboding and cryptic. Beyond these pillars, the defiled victim mutely screams its outrage. Raziel travels past the pillars and finds himself at the ancient tomb of the Sarafan. Centuries before Kain, at the behest of that time's guardians of the pillars, the Sarafan undertook a crusade of war against the ancient vampire tribes of Nosgoth. In those ancient times, vampires were regal and more closely resembled humans compared to their current-day monstrous counterparts. The atrocities committed by the Sarafan against the vampires would kickstart their evolution, a slow, rageful change that would lead to the Nosgoth of this era. Vorador, the ancient vampire, ultimately stopped the Sarafan in their tracks, but soon after retreated from the world entirely. Raziel has memory of all these ancient stories, but still, he has not put the pieces of the puzzle together yet. The Elder God warns him that what lies ahead is truth, and it might destroy him if he is not prepared for the revelation he is about to receive. Entering the tomb, Raziel would first look upon his brothers' names, marking their crypts individually, and eventually he would see his own name. Realizing what he was seeing, it dawns on him that he and his brothers were once Sarafan champions, and were once complicit in the war that brutally claimed so many vampires' lives. Being dead for so long before their resurrection, Raziel and his brothers would have no memory of their past lives. He realizes that this act of defilement that Kain had committed was vengeance for the atrocities the Sarafan had wrought against the vampires. Raziel, being almost self-righteous, can no longer claim the moral high ground against Kain, as he realizes that things are far more complicated than he believed. Not being deterred by a past life that was wiped from his memory, Raziel doubles down on his resolve, almost trying to cling to some form of lost humanity. He would see his brothers and ultimately Kain brought to justice. Finding a stray Turalim in the basement of the tomb, Raziel would quickly send it to the afterlife, with its death leaving behind a relic that would empower Raziel with a telekinetic force push ability, allowing him to proceed to his brother Rahab's domain, the drowned Abbey. Rahab's brood had overcome their aversions to water and have since withdrawn themselves from the surface world. Raziel, suffering with some PTSD from his 500-year swim in the abyss, would not be keen on falling into the water in this hidden-away abbey. Deep within the lair, he would discover his brother Rahab, a now fish-like vampire whose appearance was surprising. Kain had told him that Raziel would be coming for him. However, he shows little care when Raziel revealed that they were all once Sarafan champions, and Kain defiled their eternal rest. He is oblivious to all other motivations and will blindly follow Kain, believing that he is his savior. A fight ensues and Raziel is quickly able to blast away all the windows shielding the inner room from sunlight. Rahab, being extremely weak to sunlight, cannot handle the exposure and is utterly decimated. Devouring his soul, Raziel overcomes his previous weakness, no longer dissolving and now able to swim through the waters of Nosgoth. Raziel would return to confer with Ariel once again, foreboding as ever. She speaks of a silent city that lies in the frozen wastes of the north, with its inhabitants awaiting redemption or release. With Raziel now being able to navigate through water, reaching the north was a simple task. Arriving at the ruined city of the Dumah, a desolate and quiet stronghold lay in front of Raziel, the home of his powerful brother Dumah. A very familiar sight, as it reminded him of his own once home that was now devoid of life. Had Dumah crossed Kain and earned his retribution in turn? No, this was not the case. In fact, Dumah's own arrogance led to the downfall of his clan. The humans would fall upon the city, and believing themselves invincible, the Dumah were caught off guard. In their hubris, they were wiped out. Any of the Dumah that still exist roam the lands as scavengers. Dumah himself, a pitiful sight, once one of the mightiest vampires, he now lay confined to his throne, his body pierced through with stakes. His soul left to wander the spectral realm. Raziel could speak with him there and even tried to fight him, although his efforts would be in vain. Dumah's soul had the shape of his body, which had evolved in the centuries since Raziel's execution, and was fully conscious and self-aware. Dumah could only be killed properly in the material realm, so Raziel reanimated him by removing the stakes from his body. Dumah thanked his fallen sibling, with Raziel responding with disdain and reminding his brother that he was the one who threw him to his demise in the abyss. Dumah's pride and ego was evident. He believed that his time in limbo had honed his strength. He claimed to be more powerful than Kain. A fist fight with Dumah would be crazy, as his physical prowess may truly have rivaled that of Kain's. But every vampire has a weakness. As arrogant as Dumah is, he follows Raziel blindly through the halls of the ruined city, making the earth shake and attempting to constrict the life from Raziel's body. Raziel has no trouble leading the big brute into a trap. A powerful furnace awaits Dumah's iron hide and roasts him beyond recognition. His soul now free from its mortal coil, Raziel devours it to inherit the power of constricting. This spins spectral energy around an object to bind it or move what was previously immovable, and would allow him to now reach Kain. The Elder God tells Raziel that Kain is in the furthermost canyon of Nosgoth's frozen wastes. He is ready to face his master, empowered by the souls of his brothers. This time, Kain would pay for all the injustice he had committed over the last 1,500 years. Into the Chronoplast, Raziel has his mental fortitude tested as every corner holds a new trial. During his escapade through the Chronoplast, Raziel would find the Oracle's Cave, where Kain once had his fateful meeting with the disguised Mobius. Mobius would set the wheels in motion by fooling Kain into assassinating King William the Just and turning the whole of Nosgoth against the remaining vampires. Mobius' actions can still be felt to this day as if he were alive, yet he has remained dead for almost 1,500 years. Raziel recognizes what the ancient guardian of time represented with his dangerous schemes and trickery. Of course, Kain would be hiding in the depths of this cave system that was so profound to him in his early life. A frustrating trek lay ahead of Raziel, complex rooms with puzzles and trickery reflecting the personality and the disingenuousness of Mobius himself. Nearing the bottommost depths, Raziel would find something Mobius had left behind, relics of times past, glimpses into time, some alternate timelines that might not ever come to be. He sees in one the moment he awoke to the world as a wraith. In another, the moment the Reaver made contact with him and was destroyed. The next, his revelation at the tomb of the Sarafan. All events that had passed and led to this moment. Further along, we see Raziel standing and facing Kain with the Soul Reaver drawn, about to strike him down. This moment's placement in time is yet unclear. Further along, a moment where Raziel strikes down Ariel, which confuses him and makes him believe that his fate might be inevitable. Were all these things destined to happen, or were they all only possibilities of what could be? The final gate shows him standing in the silenced cathedral, alone, the Reaver turned red with strange powers swirling around it. He decides that none of this matters after all, and there is no other option than to move forward and meet destiny head on. Whether everything was a lie, a trick, or unavoidable fate, Kain was waiting in just the next room, and Raziel had words for him. Their fates now seeming unavoidable, Raziel enters the grand main Chronoplast chamber, a massive room engineered by Mobius as a time-streaming device. Kain seems to have been putting this device to work for him, traveling the time stream to observe outcomes at different points in history to further his own agenda. Kain greets Raziel with snide mockery about all the killing he has administered to his brothers. Raziel retorts in turn, and they begin to bicker back and forth. Kain views the losses of his generals as collateral damage, and they aren't worth mourning. To him, they are as gods and nothing else matters. Raziel identifies his warped perception of events as a rationalization and justification of his actions. However, Kain's reasoning behind everything was still unknown. What had driven him to destroy everything he had built? What was he playing at? Kain was an extremely self-aware individual and does nothing without a purpose or end goal in mind. Raziel condemns Kain and believes that the Sarafan were right to crusade against the vampires. If this was the outcome of vampire rulership and Kain was at the precipice of vampire kind, then vampiric unlife is indeed a curse upon the land. When Raziel finally presses Kain to learn his endgame, he strikes out at Raziel and the fight begins. Baiting Raziel around the room during the fight, Kain steps away a few times to activate a mechanism to start the Chronoplast's time stream. Reaching the top level of the room, Kain activates the last mechanism and the stream engages. Wounded from the battle with Raziel, Kain has a few choice words to offer before he flees through the time gate. This is not the true end for them. Their fates are yet unknown. Raziel will have to work for his revenge. Kain then throws himself into the time gate and Raziel rushes to follow. The Elder God warns Raziel that if he chooses to follow Kain, he will be beyond his aid and influence, and without a second thought, he enters the time gate, hot on the heels of Kain. Passing through the gate, Raziel would be plucked from the time stream by the old fiend Mobius. He arrived 20 years after Kain had killed King William the Just, and it is now 30 years before Kain is turned into a vampire by Mortanius. We now approach the second paradox that would create the third timeline, and you have two choices. To the left of your screen, we have the proverbial blue pill. That path leads to a dead, alternate timeline of Nosgoth that could have been, but wasn't. To the right is the red pill. We travel further down the rabbit hole and discover the truth behind the paradox. The choice is yours. What?